Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar on the HR leader's role in return. My name is Joe Nagel from the Innovation Beehive, and I'm joined by Zach Curtis, who you can see on the screen, and Mark O'Keefe, who you will see when I turn the computer in a moment. So welcome to the webinar. It's going to be highly interactive. There's lots of chance for discussion and conversation. So be sure to find the chat function. Once I finish speaking, I'll send a quick chat just to say hello so that you can receive a notification. And yeah, enjoy the webinar, and I'll now hand over to Mark O'Keefe, the founder of the Innovation Beehive.
Great, thanks very much, Joe. Hello everyone, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful Friday morning to talk about the HR leader's role in returning. My name, as Joe said, is Mark O'Keefe. I'm the founder of the Innovation Beehive, founded 11 years ago. We exist to accelerate the potential of people, of brands, of individuals and leaders, and we're very fortunate to work with a wide cross-section of organisations, both from the civil service, in retail, in publishing, in media, and in aviation and hospitality. And it's lovely actually to see some of our clients are on this session this morning, so welcome, lovely to see you. I'm also joined, as Joe said, by Zach Curtis. So Zach, do you want to say hello and say what your role is at the Innovation Beehive?
I would love to. Good morning, everybody. God, look at that photo of me on the screen there. It looks like my hair has sort of dropped off the top of my head and fallen onto my chin. Thank God I managed to shave a bit during lockdown. So my name is Zach Curtis, and yes, I'm the Capabilities Director for the Innovation Beehive. That means it's my role to really make sure that people are capable, they have the ability and the training to work as effectively as possible, particularly when it comes to returning and coming back together when they've all been through so much over that period of time. My background is in HR as an HRD for a big global corporate business, along with some other entities as well.
Great, lovely, thank you very much. And actually the reason that we're both speaking to you this morning is because we've been in the HR functions. Both of us have worked corporately in HR and L&D. I've worked in a number of senior HR roles, both in London, in the USA and in Australia. And my last job was the European HR Director for 23 countries before joining the dark side of consulting and running a practice in the UK and the USA, and then coming back to the UK almost 11 years ago to found the Innovation Beehive, where we focus on organisational culture, on leadership, and innovation focused on growth. So that's why we're here today. We are all here today because we are living in massively disrupted times. Now, the clue is in the name, the Innovation Beehive. We help organizations grow by thinking and behaving differently. And normally when we talk about disruption, we talk about disruption with a big D, in the terms of that classic book by the late Clayton Christensen, The Innovator's Dilemma. Where he talked about massive disruption because of AI, machine learning, robotics, and how large organizations can be displaced by startups. We're now definitely living in disrupted times where everything has changed. We're constantly hearing new information, seeing new data, and having to reappraise the situations. Everyone has been disrupted, whether it's the messaging we receive, whether it's about new ways of working that we've had to all suddenly go onto these fantastic digitally enhanced platforms, whether it's around what's happened to the economy. And we're getting more used to understanding, things like R ratings and where we can and can't go out. But disruption with a small d is what we'll be focusing on this morning. And within that, we'll be thinking about firstly and discussing what does the next normal look like. So there's lots of discussion around new normal. We think it's about the next normal because whatever we go back to will not be either linear or a fixed state. It will change. Expectations will change. If we see a peak or a rise in the R number, that will have impact on our people, on our customers, and the way we operate and the way we are a service to the organization. What we do know is there'll be waves of different changes, waves of different things that we'll have to work through as HR leaders, just as there were waves of different phases that we had to work through as we went before lockdown, into lockdown, and are now coming out of lockdown. We'll be talking a little bit and discussing together what the role HR should play as we move into return, what leadership is required in the business now to make people feel comfortable and inspired and focused when they return back to work. And then we're also starting to think about, in this next normal, in the future, what new skills might be needed to actually operate effectively in a post-COVID-19 world. Now, at the 18 months before we went into lockdown, the Innovation Beehive was talking to lots of leaders about disruption with a capital D and a small d. We were speaking to leaders about how they have managed through very turbulent and unprecedented times. So our research was never more timely. We talked to them about how they managed the financial crash of 2008. We talked to people about how they managed other pandemic SARS breakouts. We talked about their leadership styles. We also looked at management theory, change theory, and looked at how pandemics have impacted business and the economy previously. And we saw that there were various phases that this pandemic would go through. So those of you who've joined us previously on a webinar have heard about our roadmap through uncertainty and detail around the key questions, skills, and behaviours that are needed at each stage of the pandemic. Now, you'll be able to access more detail about this on our website afterwards, but there are 4 stages. Stabilise, which was around, my goodness, what is happening? How can we steady the ship? Sustain, when we all went into lockdown, how can we keep some sense of normality? How can we connect together? How can we keep serving our customers? What way can we keep the wheels on the business? And what potential new opportunities are there? Return, which is the phase we're in now, which actually is in 2 phases. It's planning for return, and then the actual, probably phased return. And then renew, which is about making sure we don't stay stuck just focusing on a post-COVID-19 world, but think about future opportunities, turn the face of the organization towards the future, set new goals, and take people with you on a new inspirational journey to success. So those 4 phases have been playing out through this current pandemic, and HR has had a central role throughout all of those phases, and we believe will continue to have a central role going forward. A couple of examples of the sorts of roles that HR has played during COVID-19, and a bit of a heads up, we're going to ask you in a minute, Zach, aren't we, what role you think HR has played. The first is actually, I mean, when I first heard the word furlough, after hearing the word pirogue a couple of weeks previously, I was thinking I'm going to have to take a class of medieval literature with all these phrases and words. But we all have now become very comfortable with furlough, regulation. There was a whole lot of regulation, legal stuff we had to get up to speed with very quickly ourselves as HR practitioners, so we could then advise our line managers, and that has continued to change as guidance and regulations has changed. And alongside that, we've had to really think hard and re-examine workforce planning, when people are working, where they're working, what ways of working are in place, what technology we can use, how people are working from home, what the health and safety setup is, the pressures on them at home, and how we can stay connected, both on a business level. We've seen some great examples of CEOs doing town halls, coming into Zoom calls, team meetings, but also connecting, communicating on a social level. So we've heard people doing lockdown quizzes. One of our clients on a Saturday night runs a Facebook Live DJ party, thinking of new ways that they can communicate with their team. At the same time, organizations have responded altruistically to the pandemic, whether it's about releasing people's time to go and volunteer to the NHS, whether it's about making sure that people who are on furlough understand that they can go and volunteer for the NHS, or whether it's like organizations like Barber, completely repurposing your organization and creating PPE for the NHS. All of that has had implications on what people's jobs are, what skills they are doing, how they're paid, what are requirements of them, and where they work. And HR has played a central role within that. There's some real practical, legal, technical, and organizational things that we've been involved in. But there's also been a holistic 360 piece that HR has been involved in. And that particularly has focused on well-being, making sure people are feeling well and are okay to not be okay during this pandemic. Whether it's about encouraging people to have physical movement, whether it's about working with people about where they're actually working in terms of their business, their actual desk setup, or whether it's having open conversations about people's mental well-being. HR has played a central role in just making sure that both line managers and their direct reports stay well during this time. And certainly we've talked to a lot of CPO and HR clients that have done a lot of work with senior teams, exec teams, to keep their resilience levels up, to try and avoid the pressure of being always on 24/7, because things are changing so constantly. Keeping that energy, keeping that resilience, keeping that role modeling from the top. I had a very senior client the other day have a Zoom call with all of his team based in the garden. Now, initially you might have thought before a lockdown, someone's working from home or doing a call from the garden, you might have thought, oh, I'm not so sure they're working so hard. Now I thought they're role modeling, there are new ways of working and there are different ways of behaving. And I was probably a bit more tuned into the fact that he might have had a very busy household, was still trying to get on with his job, and the only quiet place to do it was the garden. And looking at those 4 key areas, it's clear actually that HR has become a real strategic partner and a trusted advisor to the organisation. We talked for years as a community about our place at the boardroom table, about having a seat at the boardroom table. And we absolutely, during this pandemic, have earned that seat at the boardroom table. Interestingly, I read in HR magazine yesterday about a new CIPD survey that the most in-demand skills from HR, line managers say, are to help coach them on how to behave and how to run the business as they return back to work. So there is a real role for us as a community to stay that strategic partner and trusted advisor to our managers. So Zach, I'm going to hand over to you to ask the $97,000 question.
Well, Markin, role modeling, care for everyone in our community. I feel I should ask about your fingers. I'm just a bit concerned that your fingers haven't had enough exercise so far this morning. So we'd love it if you could perhaps find a way of exercising your fingers on your keyboards or whatever other method of input you have, so we can use the chat function to answer this question. How has your role, whatever your role in HR is, changed during COVID-19? So if you could start to give us an idea of that in the chat function, which is either at the top of your screen or at the bottom of the screen, depending on whether you have the web app or downloaded the actual app. And while you're doing that, I'll explain about my role in particular. My role is a lot of standing up in front of people and waving my arms around and trying to get them excited and motivated about using new tools or changing cultures or innovating. And that's had to completely change to something which is actually more about creation. It's more about trying to develop content which will engage people when I'm not trying to engage them with my physical being. So that it might not sound like a big change, but it's been quite a big mindset change, because I've had to go back to using tools which I haven't really been totally proficient in for many, many years. So it's been quite interesting. We've had to use new ways of working, new psychologies in order to leverage people's motivation and so on. So that's been quite a big change for me. We've had some chat coming through here. Yeah, absolutely. We've had one person talking about a much greater focus on employee well-being. And that's been particularly challenging, I guess, depending on whether your team is furloughed or not, because you also need to find a way to keep those employees feeling as if you're looking after their well-being as well. We've had another comment about, same sort of thing. They're used to doing a lot of face-to-face interaction and now online.
I've seen a comment here about someone saying, actually, because most of my team are furloughed, I've had to pick up a lot of the operational and detail work that I haven't done for a number of years. And I think that's interesting, actually, as people start to return back to work, what you give them to do as they step up a gear back into return to work. Some of us will be very happy to give up some of the operational stuff that we have done maybe when we were more junior in our careers.
Yeah, we've got another comment here. Yes, to answer, they're expected to be able to answer all the questions that no one else seems to know the answer to. So yes, of course, in these times, HR has to be a role model or a leader in how we deal with people. Another comment, new ways of networking. Before COVID-19, it was possible to generate some meaningful actions in corridor conversation. The famous water cooler moment where you can just actually get some business done there. Yeah, it is a little bit different now. Yep, so new ways of actually communicating and doing business.
I think what's interesting, actually, I was reading in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, sort of here's one I prepared earlier, that some organizations are starting to respond to that challenge around, we don't have a physical workplace anymore. And as Richard said, that whole point of interacting over, in the corridor, or can I grab you for 5 minutes in the staff canteen? We don't have that. Actually, organizations like WeTransfer have started to create virtual offices online. So you can pick an avatar, you can go and turn up for the office during the day, you can attend a meeting around a boardroom table, you can go and run an event online, and there's other apps. I was looking at one called Break Room yesterday as well, which basically replaces in the virtual world the physical world of the office. And as we start to think, particularly the L&D professionals on this call, as we start to think about how we continue to run our training and learning and development interventions post-COVID-19, there's not an automatic response that we'll go back to physical classrooms for a long time, but there's also a question of, do we need to go back to physical classrooms? Is online just a second best alternative, or can you create something in the virtual space that's just as useful and just as good as the actual physical face-to-face?
Couple more comments here, Mark. One is they've had to focus a lot more on communication and engagement. Absolutely, very good. Similar comment, slightly different angle. There's more coming in as well, very good. Is that, yeah, more about engaging furloughed employees. There's another comment on, how focus on well-being and coaching managers on new behaviors and how to connect with their teams, listen and be compassionate. Very good. Another comment on historically more operational and transactional HR, but they're being expected to be more supportive of teams. Interesting.
Great. So we can see that, thank you for sharing that. Our role has changed, and to some extent, actually, that strategic and trusted advisor part muscle, we've been flexing that a lot more. And as we move into the next normal, and as we start to plan and then move into return, there'll be a number of pieces that the business will require us to do to make sure that that return is as smooth and as possible for the organization. And I think it's helpful, actually, as an HR practitioner and L&D practitioner, to start thinking about return in kind of two tranches, really, or two buckets, really. The practical aspects of return and the cultural aspects of return. They are both symbiotic and both equally as important. And I think the danger is, actually, we might get focused more on one than the other. And to have a successful return to work and to make sure that people are as aligned as possible as they go back to work in whatever way that is for your organization. Both of these lenses will need to be looked through as you start to plan all your activities. So whilst every organization will be different, we've spoken to a number of our clients and asked them about their plans for return and what sort of things from a practical perspective they're starting to think about. Well, first things first, all of them, the first thing they talked about was safety, making sure that the health and safety of their team, whether it's actually their physical safety in the office, whether it's about making sure that people stay well, whether it's about sanitation, or whether it's about mental well-being, it's about addressing concerns of people as they start to think about coming to work. Realizing that, in China, for example, before COVID-19, there was a 5% absent rate on average. And this is often in organizations where your workers live on site, mass organizations in China where workers live actually in organizational employment buildings. They have found that post-COVID-19, there is a 20% increase in absence, where people are either resistant to go back to work because they're concerned about getting sick. So we might see a spike in absence, or we might see people coming in, feeling concerned, and then having to go home. So that whole umbrella of safety from a physical safety point of view and a well-being point of view. They're also starting to talk about what sort of hours people work, what the working patterns might be. Some of our clients are talking about bringing people back in shifts. We've got examples in the NHS where people are working, some teams are working Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Some teams are working Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, making sure those two teams don't cross over so they can contingency plan. If someone in that team gets sick and that whole team then has to self-isolate, how can that operation keep going? It is clear, actually, that probably people will return in cohorts. We were talking to a CPO last week, and she's saying our head office will open in June, but it's just voluntary whether people want to come back or not. So absolutely, we will see a cohort of people returning at different times. And probably we're looking at extended hours, just as we're looking at different hours for schools when they start to go back over the next coming weeks. Some people may start at 9, some people at 1, some people at 4. All of the operational support that the organisation has to give to individuals as they work in an office environment will need to be re-examined. And also people are talking about weekend working. I mean, actually, what is a weekend? Over lockdown, that seems to have blended in together. We've had so many bank holidays that seem to have gone without notice. But people will start to think about the Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 as being a thing of the past. We've done so much work over the last couple of years around building collaboration space, about helping people collide effortlessly to drive innovation. There's a beautiful picture there of the Village Green at Airbnb, and some of you may have been to one or two of our events at Airbnb. We've held them actually in that space there. But actually, you know, that whole thing about colliding effortlessly and innovating when you bump into someone at the water cooler, that's exactly what you're going to have to try and avoid during our return to work initially. So what do we do with those large open spaces? Well, we know with social distancing, we're going to have to look at desk density, we're going to have to look at how people can move around an office, maybe in a one-way system. So we believe that certainly in the short to medium term, these large collaboration areas will probably become a business as usual working areas. And thinking about how people actually come into work, the duty of care that an organisation has towards their employees doesn't just start at the door like the Amazon employee there having their temperature checked, which in and of itself is a completely new way of coming into work in the morning. Having worked a lot of my life in retail, I may have clocked in the morning as I swiped into the building. Having my temperature taken at the same time is a whole new way of turning up for work. But the duty of care actually starts at the point where someone leaves for work. Are they going to be using public transport? So what PPE and equipment do you need to give them to make them feel comfortable on their journey to work? If they decided they're going to use another form of coming to work, whether it's a car or cycling, do you have parking space available to them? We were talking to a client yesterday and they don't have enough car spaces for the number of people that are coming into their offices. They have an NCP car park not far from the office, but talking to their employees, they're very unkeen to use the NCP because they're not able to pay by phone parking. They have to then touch an awful lot of screens and pin boards, and they're not keen to do that. So they're struggling with where are we going to put all these cars? And people that are cycling in, how are we going to offer them hygiene and sanitation and showers to make sure they're clean and fresh for their day? Also, we'll need to redesign our whole reception areas and our staff entrances as well, making sure we still make some sort of attempt to be warm and friendly and welcoming to visitors and our employers as they come in, but also making sure that we take people's temperatures and that we comply with legislation, and more guidance will be coming from the government over the next couple of weeks. The key thing here is, as you're starting to think about all these practical things you have to do, is planning now with effectively what one of our clients yesterday called a captive audience. You know, we were talking to one of our clients about we're moving a leadership and development program, a global program that we rolled out in the US and in Europe. We're now looking at rolling it out in the rest of the world, but we're flipping it to be an online product. And we were suddenly told, oh, we can get the CEO, we can get the chief operating officer, because they're a bit more captive, a bit more time at home to do it. So planning with your captive audience and engaging as many stakeholders as possible. We've heard from clients where HR is pulling together a working party to actually to champion how we return to work. And making use of the fact that certainly within the UK, furloughed staff can actually do training. So as you start to plan people's return to work, using some time that they have in furlough to be able to plan and prepare for the new ways of working together. But as well as all those practical things, there are a number of cultural aspects that are important that as HR practitioners will need to consider as we return back to work. The first is actually just taking a moment to pause. Now, a lot of people have been talking about the great pause that we're in at the moment, and it seems perhaps counterintuitive to say we're going to start again and then pause. But it's important actually just to stop and recognize what's happened, to ask the organizations, what lessons have we learned? Is there anything that we've seen and behaved differently, or a new skill that we've learned that we can codify or bottle that will be advantageous to us taking forward? So many individuals have had to be much more adaptable, to be much more agile, taking those skills that organizations often struggle with and bringing them back into the workplace absolutely would drive growth and innovation. Also celebrating and recognizing those individuals who weren't furloughed, who kept the wheels on the bus going, whilst perhaps there are other people who are furloughed at home, congratulating them, thanking them for the time that they've put in and the extra commitment that they had to make. but also recognizing that other individuals have gone through a very tough time. They may have lost people that they've loved. They may have had a very difficult time with their family. They may have had extra pressures that are brought on as a result of the lockdown. So making some time just to pause and reflect and recognize what's happened and to celebrate the successes that we've had. It's going to be challenging thinking about culture, Michelle's point about focusing on communication and engagement. If we have people working at different shifts on different days across extended weeks and in different cohorts, we'll really have to think about how we use technology. Now, whilst there's been research that's come out during lockdown to say one of the reasons that so many people are reporting the fact that they're so tired is because actually having communication constantly in 1D means our brains are having to work slightly harder to pick up on all those micro expressions that we normally see in someone's body language, to be able to really understand what's going on in someone's head when you're communicating with them. We are all tired doing that, but we're all in the same boat. Think about what it's going to be like when maybe 30% of your workforce are actually in the office or on the shop floor, and the other 70% might be working from home. How are you going to hold your first team meeting or hold your town halls or any communication, making sure that you really aren't just talking to the 30% in the room and the other 70% aren't just watching? Because this is all about inclusion as well. This is about, we've done a very good job, I believe, over the last couple of months to hold on to diversity and inclusion, to make sure as practitioners that we seek out the quieter voices. We ran a webinar at the beginning of lockdown about encouraging shy people to speak on Zoom, how introverts and extroverts might work differently and respond differently to technical platforms. But actually, as you start to realize you'll have different people working in different places, making sure you use the technology to also drive your inclusion agenda. So you bring those teams together and keep them united over the common goals that you're trying to build. And to do that, it might be worth thinking about your employee experience, the way you might think of your customer experience. So whether you're a retailer, whether you're a manufacturer, you will have an end user, somebody who ultimately experiences your product or service. It might be a student, it might be a consumer, whoever it is. And you'll have some sort of clear customer journey, practically the journey they go through as they interact with your brand, and the desired experience that you want them to feel as they go through that. Our recommendation is that HR practitioners should start to think about their employees' return to work in the same way they think about a customer journey, plotting those customer moments, those moments of truth in the employee's journey back to work, thinking about their first day, what the first team meeting might be, the first time they're in reception, the first time they walk out the door and have to walk towards the tube or get on a bus or get in their car. What might they be experiencing? What do you want them to experience? And what within that touch point is in the organization's control? And one way of doing this is reaching out now, talking to your employees to understand with them what they think the challenges might be, how they might be able to overcome them, and contract together about new ways of working and what you'll commit to do from both sides, both leaders in the organization and the individuals, employees, to contract together on new ways of working to make sure that you can return and be focused as quickly as possible on getting the business up and running. So as you return, you'll move into what we have called the next normal. There are different expectations, and we believe also potential new opportunities in the next normal phase. We think talking to clients and talking to team members out there and listening to what people are hearing from their employees, there's definitely an increased expectation or questionings about people's work-life balance. Am I prepared to go back to doing the amount of traveling I did previously? Am I prepared to make the commute? I've talked to people who've been, who live in Leeds and are seconded in London and away from their families 3-4 nights a week, who are starting to say, I'm not sure I want to go back to that. I'm not sure I actually want to physically go to an office. I like being able to see my children at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when they come home from school. So perhaps expect an increased requests for work-life balance from flexible working. People's expectations around travel, whether it's travel for business or commuting, will definitely come up in conversations. And I think also something that's started to be talked about with our clients is about how people see benefits and reward. Often, part of our sort of benefits package might have something vaguely in there about an employee assistance program, something in there about, well-being, some sort of connection in with personal training or health checks. the kind of lighter side of employee benefits that, if I'm in all honesty, I think a lot of employees didn't really think of as a core part of their benefit package until COVID-19. And actually what we're hearing more now from HRDs and CPOs is part of their benefit package having a really clear, compelling and responsive well-being offer is something that their teams are asking them for, have used significantly during COVID-19, and will be wanting more of when they return to work in these new flexible ways of working. We do think there's a huge opportunity around this, obviously around being flexible in where people work and meeting people where they need to be so they can do the best job they can possibly do for you. And that will play in also to a focus on diversity and inclusion, casting the net as widely as possible so you can have as many types of people in your organization, because you're offering real flexibility about where people work and when people work. We, I think, have seen some incredible collaboration happening over the last couple of months. I mean, a lot of my workshops are done face-to-face, my idea generation sessions done in meeting rooms with post-it notes. We've flipped all of that online. We've kept real collaboration in our projects. And I think lots of organizations have really been surprised at how positively the organization has collaborated both personally and professionally during the pandemic. I believe that in 2021, we will see an absolute rise in startups. Some people, some businesses have thrived during this. There are opportunities to meet our customers where they are, to understand their different expectations now, look at our business model, look at our products, our services and experience, and innovate a way that makes sure we are still relevant and still part of their shopping portfolio. We've increased our digital capability. And absolutely, people will now start thinking about, as I come back to work, why do I exist in this workplace? What are we doing this for? A lot of people have really got into themselves and thought, what is my life about? And are now starting to question their role in the organization and the organization's role in the world. And those organizations that have a compelling sense of purpose and sense of meaning and are able to bring people around that, I think will have a real energy in the organization to face forward. Now, I've talked quite a lot, so Zach's going to ask you a couple of questions.
Yes, again, we are concerned that perhaps your fingers have had a rest now and they need to be a little bit more exercise. So please, please, please do answer the following two questions into the chat box. The first one is, what do you think, you've heard from Mark, what do you think will be your employees' new expectations? And the second thing, we'll do them both at the same time. What do you see as an opportunity? So again, whilst you're typing that in, you've heard a bit about what we feel expectations and opportunities might be. I've been speaking to an employee from a well-known global drinks manufacturer, the distiller, and they were telling me that they previously were working in an office in London. They very much enjoyed working remotely, but they think that they're going to move from remotely to anywhere. They'd like to move not just back to the office, but they'd like to work, wherever they felt like. So if they felt like working from a Costa in Birmingham one day, then fine, that's their expectation moving forwards. That might not be the way that everyone feels, but that's for them. It might be that comments are starting to come in. It might be that expectations will be flexibility on time, as Mock talked about, or it could be that expectation might be around loyalty from companies. So some of the comments coming in around expectations are more people wanting to work from home, at least part of the time. Yep, I completely see that that will be an expectation. Clients' workforce will expect freedom to work flexibly. Yes, flexibility and freedom, I think, are the big watchwords of the moment. What about opportunities? Any opportunities that you might see coming through? More for expectations, greater support. Yes, support with safety and well-being. We've seen across the country that humans generally do need very clear guidelines on safety and well-being, and I think that will remain the same as we move through to return to work. An opportunity would be to save costs on office premises as more employees work from home. Now, that's largely my background, commercial premises. I completely see that that would be an opportunity, and I'm quite glad I'm not in that sector now. Sorry if any of you on the call are, but there's an opportunity to move to co-working, as Mark talked about previously, and some of the big players are doing exactly that. Another opportunity is to reduce the office footprint. Yes, absolutely, saving costs. There was a Yell. Back when Yale were working, they got rid of all of their UK offices and moved everybody onto a sort of business lounge product. And they saved a huge amount of money per year, and actually productivity didn't dip. Another opportunity is to build trust between teams. Yeah, very nice. Very nice. Trust, again, is going to be very, very important because we've all spent so long being distant from each other. Another opportunity is for all things digital as employees realize the benefits. Absolutely. I think there's also an opportunity to start to change culture in businesses. Not saying that culture was bad before, but we've seen from earlier that culture will need to change if we're going to be as productive as possible. That's very good. There's been a bit of a range there, Mark, of opportunities and expectations. There's another one that's come through. The trust in organizations has grown during lockdown for the most part. So yeah, huge opportunity for change.
Great, super, thank you very much. And actually a key part of creating that trustful environment, that psychologically safe environment, and the kind of culture that we'll be stepping back into as we return to work is leadership. Now, we've done a lot of work over the last 18 months around how leaders lead during times of disruption, and there are other webcasts on our YouTube page that go into that in detail. But we've been talking to leaders and observing leaders and talking to our CPO and HRD clients around how their leaders have operated, the sort of behaviours that they've demonstrated during COVID-19, and what behaviours they would like them to bring back into the workplace. So what we've heard about is there's been some increase in vulnerability from leadership. There's no playbook on how to actually go through the pandemic. Someone talked about earlier on this call about not knowing what the answer was. And actually leaders are often in the situation where, they are the last port of call where someone says to them, what's happening? What's the answer? During this, leaders have had to say, I don't know all of the answers. I don't know at the moment what the solution will be. This is what I'm working through. So it's led to more human and authentic relationships. We've seen each other's curtains, we've seen each other's children, we've seen each other's pets, we've heard dogs barking in the spare room. We've got a far more, I think, authentic and human connection to people. I was watching a very senior leader in a global bank who normally would be up on stage at a town hall, master of the universe in a very expensive suit in front of hundreds of people, knowing all the answers and being a master of the universe. Now, he is based in Hong Kong. Hong Kong property prices absolutely phenomenal. Flats very small. He was doing a global webcast from basically his hall, and behind him was a front door and a row of coats. Stripped away of all that hierarchy and all of the signals that you have as a senior leader in the business, it was the most authentic communication I believe he's ever delivered. Now, within that, we have noticed what we call startup leadership. We all have taught and heard the phrase fail fast and learn, but leaders actually have not been positive in our experience of failing in public. But we've had to fail in public during this pandemic because we haven't had all of the answers. Leaders have had to work with the information that's in front of them at the time and make decisions based on that information. And sometimes that information changes and they have to change their decision. They have to learn from what's happening, iterate very quickly and come up with a new decision. That's what startups do. They put something out there into the world. It fails. They learn from what's happening in the marketplace. They iterate, they improve, and they move and pivot in a new direction. And we've seen leaders doing that significantly over the last couple of months. And we believe that startup leadership, if it's brought back into the organizations, will help them be far more agile, far more innovative, and also far more inclusive. If they're open and honest about the data they're working with, how their decision making is taking place, and having these one-to-one conversations with people, there's an opportunity to be far more inclusive and transparent on decision making, which ultimately will build higher levels of trust in the organization. But leaders have been operating in a real rock and a hard place over the last couple of months. Jim Collins' fantastic book, Good to Great, talked about the Stockdale paradox. And the Stockdale paradox concerns itself with James Stockdale, who was a prisoner of war in the Vietnam War. He survived many terrible years as a prisoner of war. And when he came out, he returned back to the United States and actually at one point stood as a vice president candidate. And he was asked for his advice. How do you get through such awful times, such as being in a prisoner of war camp? And he said, you have to have faith that you'll prevail in the end, regardless of the difficulties. And at the same time, you must confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they may be. And actually, we've seen leaders living this COVID-19 paradox right the way through this pandemic. They've had to be very honest and open about the state of the business. They've had to furlough staff. They've had to talk about the income fall. Those of you who are retailers on this call absolutely have been so significantly impacted by COVID-19. So having that conversation with your staff and having that conversation with your team members to then help you make the right decisions with the data in front of you. Very difficult, but also at the same time, your role as leaders is to help inspire people, to motivate people, to try and paint a picture for them beyond COVID-19, beyond the pandemic, and let them agree that there will be some sort of next normal future tomorrow. So having to balance those two things together, the Stockdale paradox, has been at the core of the duality of leadership that's been required over the pandemic. And one way we think that leaders who've managed to navigate this really well have taken their inspiration and stimulus from dogfighters in the Second World War. Dogfighters in the Second World War practiced something called the OODA loop. And those who practiced the OODA loop were statistically more likely to survive a fight in the air than those who didn't. And we noticed that leaders who are practicing this OODA loop are far more transparent and far more able to navigate their way through the Stockdale paradox. The first bit of the OODA loop is when you're having to make a decision as a leader, is looking at the data and the detail in front of you at the moment. Asking yourself, is this the latest data set? And then asking yourself, what has changed since I last saw data concerning this particular activity? Then the second phase, orientate yourself. As well as then looking at what has changed, be conscious of any bias or any lens through which you might be examining that data. Just ask yourself, am I looking at this data in the most unconscious biased way? If you know it's the latest data, you're looking at it without a particular bias lens, and you've noted and observed what's changed since the last time you looked at this data set, you're then able to make a decision based on the best course of action for now, and then act and implement it. Knowing that as new data and new information arises, you'll have to go back around that loop, observing what the difference is and orientating yourself towards it. Now, if leaders are transparent about using the OODA loop, they've actually been able to take their teams with them to help them go through the decision-making process, to help them understand why we're making this decision when no one knows exactly what to do, and when we're constantly being confronted with new unknown unknowns. And it's built real trust, real engagement, and a real sense of collaboration in teams and organizations. And as HR leaders, as we're starting to think about the kind of cultures that we want to create going back into the business, and how we can help coach and support our leaders, which we know from a CIPD survey that Peter Cheese published yesterday is exactly what they want. Helping them think through things like the Stockdale paradox, think through things like the OODA loop, and staying vulnerable, being collaborative, and focusing on inclusion will create that culture where we can not only return, but then face the organization towards the new, set new objectives, new goals, and then take your people with you into the next phase. But there will be some new skills required to do that. And whilst every organization is different, Zach, as our capability director, has been thinking about what kind of skills we'll need in the next normal.
I have, and I feel that there's sort of three buckets of skills, really. The three buckets are innovation, interpersonal, and execution. Now, what that really means for us is that us as leaders and our teams as well have all been challenged by absolutely unexpected problems. We've had to be flexible, we've had to be agile, we've had to draw on the skill of the innovator in order to make sure that we can try out, test, new solutions, which may then fail, but we reiterate them and move on. That means that we've had to have agility. We've also had to have digital capability in order to try and deliver work in a different way when we can't work in the way that we had previously. The second bucket has been interpersonal. Now, I'm not much of a hugger, but I admit I have missed hugs, which is extraordinary. So if I have, that must mean that everyone else has gone through some sort of emotional journey. And it might be, as Mark talked about, that we have to go back to working in cohorts, or we have to go back to working in phases or shifts or different parts of time, bearing in mind that everyone, all of our teams and ourselves, have been through quite high emotional levels of stress, a roller coaster of a journey of emotions. And we need to recognize that and make sure that we can talk about that freely in the business when we bring people back. So that if they have any levels of anxiety or any challenges at all, then we can make sure that we are all aligned in moving forwards. That means we need to have empathy. We need to have a level of emotional intelligence as well as our teams. And we need to be able to build relationships remotely, which is something we haven't really done effectively in the past. The third bucket is execution. We still need to get the job done. We need to develop new strategies to keep people motivated, to keep them delivering the work, because especially if they're not in the same physical space as their line manager, that's linked to the trust that we've been talking about. It's linked to making sure that people are motivated to deliver the work, but also we need to empower them with either tools or training or capability or the mindset to be able to deliver that work and work remotely if that's required. I think that leads on to three sets of questions. For innovation, that leads on to how can we, as HR leaders, encourage our teams and our leadership to make them capable, to make the teams capable of experimentation, to make them agile in trying new things and open to new ideas and new ways of working. I think in interpersonal, we need to be able to start to ask, how can we move beyond perhaps operational HR, we've got lots of that to do at the moment, to ensure that teams improve their effectiveness and stability whilst remaining connected with very strong communication skills. I think also there's some questions we need to be able to ask around execution on how can we encourage our leaders and our leadership teams to develop two-way or multi-way trust between teams and leadership.
Great, thank you. So every organization will have a different skills requirement. But as Zach said, the three main buckets we think will need to be examined as you move forward into the next normal of return. So going back to where we started from, really, you know, the HR community has absolutely been at the center of planning for, and executing in the pandemic and COVID-19. We've really been the strategic partner and the trusted advisor of the organization, of our line managers and of our employees. As we start to think about return, planning for return, moving into return and then into renew, there are many practical and cultural activities that we'll need to put in place. There's technical, practical and operational things to do. And true business partnering will mean that we'll have to be able to deliver that. But my concern and my ask is that we don't just get dragged back into doing lots and lots of tasks for the organization. It's many years since we were the personnel department, where we just did the sort of tea and tissues on a daily basis. This is about really trying to think holistically in the organization. This is about thinking strategically in the organization and being able to balance all of the practical things we need to do to make sure that people are able to work with the cultural things that we need to do to make sure that people are able to work effectively and that leaders are able to lead people into renew and the next normal and the new tomorrow. So on that note, I'd just be interested to ask, what will be your first step? So again, using the chat, is there anything that you'd like to share, reflecting on today, or the steps that you're currently put in place? So your first step to either prepare or as you move back to work and into return, what steps will you be taking as an HR practitioner?
And Mark, whilst people are typing that out, we're grateful to be your finger trainers, personal trainers for the fingers. So thank you very much for exercising your fingers during the call. I noticed that one person on the webinar, Mark, then one of the first actions is going to be sending me a virtual hug. That's nice.
Oh, that's nice. Lovely. I've got someone coming through here says they're going to share our slides with their line manager. I think it's a great thing. Actually, we've had that before where someone's actually asked us, you know, I really enjoyed that. Can I get a copy of the webinar? I'd like to share it with my team. Joe will be sending out some information afterwards and enable you to do that. So hugs and sharing our information. I think that's not a bad start. Great. Well, listen, thank you very much, Zach, for your contribution this morning. I'm going to hand back to Joe now, who's going to end the webinar.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Do you like the sort of high-tech way that we move between screens, by the way? Hey. Yes, thank you, Zach, and thank you, Mark, and thank you, Zach, for sharing those insights into how HR leaders can lead for return. And next week, we're holding a webinar which is all about rebuilding the team for return. And Zach is going to be leading that. And you can see on the screen, there's a QR code. This is another high-tech thing that we have where you can just open the camera on your phone, scan that with the camera. You don't even need to press take. It'll just offer you the opportunity to open the web link, and you can register for that webinar, and you'll receive a sign-up link. You'll receive a registration link later today. The other thing I want to mention is that we created a toolkit for leaders who are thinking about return and thinking about the challenges that are posed and how they can manage and lead them. And I know a few people on this webinar have used that toolkit already. So I'll send you a little bit of information about that today with a special discount code for having joined our webinar. So thank you all so much for your inputs, and I hope your fingers are well exercised. Mine certainly are. Have a great rest of the day, everybody. Stay safe and be strong.